Seventh grade Kaiser kids, it's time to finish up the year over the next couple weeks. We've got a few big units to talk about still, but the end is near. I know you miss these dum dums, so here's your virtual dum dum sucker. You can go ahead and lick your computer screen if you want. Let's see. So this week, I've already posted about 3 pages of reading from the Green Book, along with a map. And hopefully you read over that. Some of that might be a little bit confusing, but after this lecture slash slideshow slash comedy routine, it will be super clear. So you probably realize that this week is all about the Reformation. And I'm putting the emphasis on a different syllable when I say Reformation, because I could say reformation, right? So it's about reforming the church. And I don't know if you've thought about why Europe looks like this today. All of these countries, hopefully you can think about, the stuff we've talked about, Greece, Italy, the Franks, all of that, and you can kind of start to see how it comes together. But you're only in 7th grade, so we don't go into all these details. But you'll get more in high school and even more in college. But the idea is that there's a story behind each one of these countries. And a big part of every culture, is religion. So a culture is a way of life. And religion is an important part of a culture, and it's shaped history. You can't study European history or a history of the world and not deal with religion. So my lawyers have asked me to remind you that even though we'll be talking about religion this week, I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just telling you this is what they believed. And actions follow belief. So when we talk about how people revolted against the Catholic Church, there'll be changes in society, there'll be wars, people will lose their lives, countries will be redrawn, and history will be changed. Who's crying? Okay, so let's talk about the idea that I know you already have in your brain because you're smart. Before the 1500s, there was only one Christian church in Western Europe, right? It was the Catholic Church. Catholic means universal. So there's one universal church in Europe before 1500s. And when they told you to do something, you did it. Because the Pope, being the head of the Catholic Church, was in control of your soul. And if you didn't follow the rules, you were sent to the hot spot for all eternity. So everyone did what he said. And we've already talked about how there was that tension between kings and the Pope, as in who's the boss. Was the Pope the boss? Was the king the boss? Well, the worst the king could do was kill you. The worst the Pope could do was kill you and have your soul sent to HE double hockey stick forever. So there's that. At least that's what the Christians believed. So they always did what the Pope said. But over time, people start to get a little bit grumpy with the abuses of the Pope and the people who work under him. Do you remember this old chart of the church organization with the Holy Father of the Roman Catholic Church at the top, but then archbishops and bishops and priests making up the pyramid? And if you're an archbishop, you were very powerful. And if you're a supreme archbishop, then you got to be a cardinal. This chart doesn't show the cardinals, but there are a few cardinals. Remember, the cardinals are the ones who pick the Pope from amongst themselves. And sorry, ladies, you can't be a girl and be a pope. Don't blame me. I didn't write the rules for the Catholic Church. It's still that way today. So the Pope is at the top, cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and priests. And this looks great, a nice little hierarchy. But over time, there were corrupt popes, just like there are corrupt police officers, corrupt Uber drivers, corrupt nurses. There's always going to be a few bad apples in the bunch. The problem is when you're a bad apple as a pope, you wield a lot of authority, and you could put people in positions that they don't really deserve, meaning like, I really am not really that good in the church, but if I give you a lot of money, you'll make me an archbishop or even a cardinal. And the Pope would, for example, need to raise money to build buildings because the Catholic Church during that time period loved their buildings and they needed money. So they would often sell what are called indulgences. And you probably read that in your reading, right? It's basically a piece of paper that says that I know I messed up, but I gave you a little money, so my sins are forgiven. So the Pope would sell these um, indulgences, and after a while, some people in the church, common people and priests, all through the church, started to see this was probably wrong. So that brings us to the Reformation, right? So that means to change for the better. So the Reformation, or the Reformation, as we call it, starts in the 1500s. So every once in a while, you need to kind of change things up a little bit and go through and fix things in any organization. Whether we're talking about Chuck E. Cheese, I mean, look at Chuck E. Cheese in 1977. Look at Chuck E. Cheese in 1994. Look at Chuck E. Cheese in 2012. Which one is the creepiest, kids? I don't know. The 1977 looks like he's a lot less active and hitting the cheese pizza pretty hard. 94 Chuck E. Cheese looks like he's a skater dude, although he has gloves on. I don't think that's a helmet. And then, of course, 2012 is a total redo. A lot of plastic surgery on that. Little nip and tuck here and there. You've got a new lean mouse. So the point is, when you run Chuck E. Cheese, sometimes you change things up. Sometimes people force the change on you. It wasn't like during the Reformation that the Catholic Church said, oh yeah, we got a lot of problems, let's clean these things up. No way. It took a lot of people inside the church rocking the boat, getting in trouble, forcing the issue. So this chart looks a little overwhelming. If you were to think about those who are Christians today, you might consider yourself a Christian. If you do, you fall somewhere on this chart. But you'll notice that at the very top there was only one, the Roman Catholic Church. And over time, people change the church or break away from the church to start their own form of Christianity. Those people who were trying to change the church, they were actually considering themselves as people who were protesting against the ways of the Catholic Church. So sometimes you'll hear the word Protestant, meaning they were the ones who were protesting the indulgences of the church, or sometimes the church would even sell old bones or pieces of wood that they said belonged on of the cross. And we all know that wasn't the case, but if you were an illiterate person living in the times of the Renaissance or the Reformation, you might give a few coins just to see the bones of a past saint, like St. Paul or St. Peter. We'll talk about that in a moment. But if you look at this chart, if you're a Christian, you could probably find your church denomination on this chart somewhere. But I see some big names that pop out, right? The Lutheran Church. We're going to talk about that. That's the red box on the chart. The Church of England. And look at all those different types of churches that have come out of the Church of England. So if you're a Baptist today, you can see that you originally were part of the Church of England. If you're a Methodist today, you were part of the Church of England. If you're Episcopalian, you were part of the Church of England. But if you're on the light pink, if you consider yourself, say, a Presbyterian, or maybe you're a part of the Brethren Church, that's all part of this Reformed group that we're going to talk about. So there's really three big chunks: Lutheran, Church of England, and the Reformed Church. The others that are kind of more in Russia and Greek, they kind of spin off and do their own thing, and you'll learn more about those types of churches in high school. So I mentioned that indulgences were sold. I also want to point out that the church would often have bones of certain people from the Bible, at least they would claim they are, and you would come and pay money, and you would be blessed. You were told by the church that you would be blessed just by looking at the skull of someone, maybe one of the 12 apostles. And many people gave lots of money just to be near these bones and these relics. Now, they weren't always bones. They could have been a nail from the cross, or a piece of cloth maybe that the church said was part of Jesus's gown or robe. Either way, many people in the church for many years gave money. And even today, there are some churches that still have relics out. and people would go and worship them. However, during this time period in the 1500s, there were some people who started to see the error of indulgences and relics. And one of those people that really gets the whole thing started and is generally considered one of the most important people in world history is Martin Luther. Now, you just said the word king because that's what you're used to hearing. But Martin Luther is a German monk, right? And so our Martin Luther King, who's a civil rights leader who you get a day off for a national holiday in January, was named after Martin Luther, right? Because Martin Luther King's dad was a preacher. He had been named after this famous Christian. So in 1517, Martin Luther is a monk in the church in Germany. He's part of the Catholic Church. He hears about relics and indulgences, and he is appalled. He thinks that that is a total abuse of the Pope's power. The Pope is lying. These bones aren't really the bones of Paul or Peter. This is not really the gown of Jesus. This nail really wasn't in the cross and the foot of Jesus. It's all a lie, and it's just to get money so that the Pope can have power and build nice buildings and have nice clothes and eat nice food. So Martin Luther in 1517 writes up 95 things that he thinks is wrong with the Catholic Church. And he writes them all up and he nails them to the door in the church of Wittenberg, Germany. I'm sorry, if I was German, I would say Wittenberg. Wittenberg, Germany. He nails this list of things. And as you could tell by this little picture, that there are lots of things already on the doors of this church. It's kind of like a town bulletin board. So he wasn't doing something that other people didn't do. It's just what he wrote was shocking to the Catholic Church, that a monk would stand up to the Pope and say what the Pope has been doing is wrong. So Martin Luther hated relics. He hated indulgences. He posted the 95 Theses, that's what we call them, meaning 95 big central points, right? If you write anything in language arts, we ask you for a thesis, right? So he had 95 amazing topic sentences, and he posted them on the door. And what do you think is going to happen? Is he going to get a warm hug from the Pope? And it's like, oh, I didn't really think about it. Thanks so much for pointing that out. Or are they going to like, this guy is busted? Yeah, it's that one. So in 1521, a few years later, they have to have a trial for him. Now, it seems weird to call this trial the Diet of Worms, right? So Worms is a place in Germany, and a diet is just an assembly. Even today in Japan, their Congress is called a diet. So the Diet of Worms meets in 1521 to decide whether Martin Luther has broken enough of the Catholic rules to be kicked out of the church and killed. And Martin Luther basically says, yeah, I did it. I don't want to be part of your church anymore. And he escapes with the help of a few other people, and he starts the Lutheran Church. So there are some things about the Catholic Church and Christianity that Luther keeps. One of the big things is that he wants people in Germany to be able to read the Bible in German. During this time, the church it was actually illegal for a person to read the Bible in their own language. It was often just recited in Latin. So most people didn't really understand what the Bible said. They had to trust what priests and bishops and archbishops and cardinals and the Pope would say about it. Martin Luther said, let's get this translated into German. People can read it for themselves and they can decide what these passages mean, not what the Pope says they mean. So Martin Luther starts the Reformation in Germany in 1517. So if you're a Lutheran, you can trace your church history to Martin Luther. But he's not the only one that is rocking the boat of the Catholic Church. So Martin Luther is in Germany, but in France and in Switzerland, a man named John Calvin is basically a few years behind Martin Luther. And John Calvin's big thing is that he wants people to read the Bible in their own language as well. You don't need church structure. You don't need fancy robes. Just read the Bible and decide for yourself what it means. Of course, the Catholic Church doesn't want that. They don't want people to have the Bible in their own language. They want to be in control of everything, and they want people to come to them to figure out what the Bible means. Another thing John Calvin did was he read the Bible and he taught that the Bible basically taught that people were already either predestined to go to heaven or predestined to go to the hot spot. So it wasn't about whether the Pope would bless you or not. Some people were already on God's good list and some people were not. And now that seems difficult for us to wrestle with today in our brains, but there are still many Reformed churches today that believe that. They believe that God has already preordained some people to be saved and some people not. John Calvin and his followers in the Reformed Church were very strict. They were unable to dance or to have any kind of social life, really. Even today, if you're part of the Reformed Church, many of these churches will not let you go to the movies or play cards, anything like that. Some of these people in France who were followers of John Calvinist would become Huguenots. And you'll learn more about the Huguenots in high school. But France today is kind of a country that's kind of mixed. There's lots of about half Catholic and half Protestant. Remember that word? People who protested and broke away. So really today in Europe and in the United States, if you're Christian, you're either Catholic or you're one of those Protestants that broke away in France or Switzerland or in England or in Germany, like we've talked about. And by the time we get to 1598, there's an agreement in France called the Edict of Nantes that basically says you can be whatever you want in France, Catholic or part of the Reformed Protestant Church. All right, so we've got Martin Luther in Germany, John Calvin in France and Switzerland. And our last little slide for tonight is the Church of England. There was a king, Henry VIII. What is that? I don't even know. Who remembers the Roman numerals? Yeah, that's Henry VIII. He was the king, and he was part of the Catholic Church, as all of Europe was until we get into the 1500s. The problem for Henry VIII was he was having a hard time with the ladies. He wanted a divorce. He couldn't find a wife that would give him a son. So he thought it was their fault, not his. And so he asked the Pope if he could divorce his wife, and the Pope said no. And the king says, well, if the Pope won't let me and the Catholic Church won't let me, I'm going to start a new national church in England called the Church of England, or Anglican. The Anglican Church, or England, is kind of the same word. And even today, in England, the Queen, or whoever the monarch is the head of the Church of England. It's a little different, right? Their system is way different from the United States, where we don't have an official church. But in the United Kingdom, the monarch is the head of the church. And that's all thanks to Henry VIII. So he breaks away from the church in England. John Calvin is the guy who breaks away or leads the break away from the Catholic Church in France and Switzerland. And Martin Luther starts the whole thing off in Germany in 1517. Are dates important? I don't know. Wait 2 doesn't show up for homecoming, girls, and you're standing on the porch. Yes, dates are important. 1517 is kind of an interesting time. I want you to know that we're in the 1500s. This is actually after Christopher Columbus, right, sailed to the Americas. So this is happening about the same time as all those explorers. This is happening about the same time as many of those Renaissance painters are painting, right? Michelangelo is painting the Sistine Chapel when a lot of these people are protesting and calling for the reformation of the church. So keep that in your brain. All right, so I think that's good for tonight. I want you to keep in mind Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Henry VIII, and how these three reformers really changed the church and the history of the world, really. And we'll talk more about how that really happens, but there will be wars between Catholics and Protestants, and it all really starts here during the Reformation in the 1500s. Okay, so if you need to watch this again, do it. Stay tuned for learning activities later in the week, plus a conference on Schoology, probably on Thursday. You guys don't want me to stop, do you? You want me to keep going? Okay. When I was a kid, I had a dog. His name was Zach. I love Zach. He got hit by a car. He never was the same. Good thing animals can't feel pain and they don't have a soul, right, kids? Kidding. They can feel pain, but they don't have a soul. Maybe they do. I don't know. Want me to keep going? Crickets. 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 All right, Kaiser Cares. Bye.